Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I'm Uranio Paes.
And today we are talking about teachers who have been important in our lives and our development.
Great. I love this theme, Bea. It's something that I was looking forward to talking with you about because teachers have been quite important in my life in general.
And I think teachers generally are important in the lives of all of us. Often I think teachers don't really get the recognition or the appreciation or the rewards they deserve for the amazing work they do in educating us, helping us grow, helping us understand things. And there's just so many things teachers generally give us. And we'll be talking about some of our specific teachers today, some of our Enneagram teachers, but also other teachers that have influenced us and helped us grow in many different ways.
Including teachers from the far past, I think. We're going to talk about perhaps teachers from school and university, people who were important for us in our lives. So it doesn't always match the theme or the subject we were studying. At times, I mean, most of them do, I think, at least in my case, but at times, no. And they have been a major influence or they have been very important for us.
So it sounds like you're saying it's not necessarily about the topic or the information that they imparted to you. It was more about who they were in your life and the things that they gave you that might have been more intangible.
I think this will be true actually for only one or two of them. But yes, these were very important for me. I also think this is a great opportunity, Bea, for us to name some of our influences, because some teachers have brought us information and experiences that helped us be who we are today and to be working with the Enneagram in the ways that we are working. And I think it's very ethical and fair always to name our influences. I mean, it's never only about teachers. We are influenced by authors, by other people in society, by family members, friends, but also, but teachers play such a major role, especially when it comes to something like the Enneagram, because I believe that it's not possible to really know a lot about the Enneagram if you don't have teachers. If you only go by books and podcasts, it's difficult because you never learn everything about the Enneagram if it's only cognitive. You need to have experiences, see examples, see people who walk the talk and who influence you in other ways.
Yes, I believe you're right. And I also think that in the Enneagram world, it's important to choose your teachers wisely because the Enneagram is such an important topic. And you know what this reminds me of is that for probably centuries, the Enneagram was passed from master to student or from teacher to student in secret schools, in secret. And I think sometimes we don't always remember this about the Enneagram. And of course, the origins of the Enneagram are somewhat mysterious. But I think one reason why we don't know so much that's definitive about where the Enneagram comes from or how it came up through the ages is because this was really sacred knowledge. This was wisdom that goes very deep, that was, we think, passed on in these more underground settings. And it's only in the more modern era that it's been out in the open. And so both for that reason, it's important to get this really precious information from teachers that you trust and teachers who have developed a certain level of competence and have something important to pass on. And it's also, the quality of the information. And as you say, the modeling of how we bring the Enneagram into the world in ethical and responsible ways.
Yes, B. And I want to say a few things about three basic styles of teaching, or, you know, groups of teachers: the body types, the heart types, and the head types. It's very generic, but I think it's important. So, body type teachers, I believe, are influential, and they may not be forgotten by students in the future, mostly because of their examples or their energy, or how responsive they are to things, or how self-confident they are, also trustworthy in a way many times. Now, hard type teachers may be a bit different, and they engage the students in a very good way, and they may really support and understand and listen to the students. Perhaps they can express what they want, sometimes with their heart. And it's proven that the role of emotion in learning is vital. And I actually heard someone saying the other day that it's even more vital today because of how much people learn through the internet. And then when there is emotion in a teaching, it gets more easily consolidated. Um, because of the difference for between that and the internet. Now, it's still talking about hard type teachers. I believe they really help students individually at times and in times of trouble, and they give that extra care and affection that may make a huge difference for people. And head type teachers many times are really admired by others as to how much they have studied, how articulate they can be, or how they explain things, how much they know, or they jump from one subject to the other and build bridges, and also how they develop some unique forms of thoughts and thought lines and reasoning in a way that can be very inspiring.
I agree. And I do think that Enneagram type can often shed light on what makes a teacher so powerful or so effective, because all the types and certainly people of different centers of intelligence have special gifts and specialties. And so I think you're right in highlighting that these specific things that certain teachers give us can be a function in part of their dominant center of intelligence or their type also.
And maybe it's just good to do this as a tribute to our teachers, right? And a big thank you is included here.
Yes, although I do want to say that, of course, teachers are human, or the ones that we're going to be talking about are human. And I think it's important to say that all humans have flaws. And certainly it's not about idealizing our teachers or saying that they, didn't also sometimes, perhaps inadvertently, teach us things by way of example that we didn't want to repeat going forward. But for the most part, what stands out to me and the people that we're going to talk about are really all the amazing gifts they gave me, and all the important things they did for me, both in my life and my own intellectual, emotional, spiritual development.
Thank you for bringing this point up. I actually think, B, that when it comes to Enneagram teachers or even spiritual teachers, sometimes when they are really good, they can be even a bit weird or different. So we're not going to talk about these aspects of them. We're going to concentrate more on why they were important for you or for me.
Exactly. And one more thing I want to say about that is I do think it's important for us to sometimes be careful of not idealizing others, whether it's teachers or anyone else, because in a way, sometimes I think we're projecting something positive in ourselves on them as if they are the carriers of something special. And although that's usually very often true, it's also important for us to realize that they give that to us, and we need to also own what they helped us develop in ourselves, for ourselves. So, what teacher or teachers would you like to tell us about first?
Mrs. Zelinda. So again, I'm from Brazil, and almost all of my teachers that were really meaningful for my life are from Brazil. And Mrs. Zelinda was my teacher during several years at school, secondary school, and up to right before university. And she was a teacher of history, philosophy, and some other um, subjects connected to those. And she was absolutely brilliant. She would connect all themes with other themes and explain in such a good way. And she had so much knowledge. She was impressive. And nobody ever said that disliked her or anything. She wasn't fun. She wasn't energizing. She wasn't dynamic, but she was amazing. And talking to friends from that time, today, so many of them mention how amazing she was.
And what exactly was amazing about her?
The amount of knowledge and how she dealt with knowledge and how much she passed it on.
Sounds like important for you as a five.
Exactly. And I think she was a five herself. And so
Oh,
I could see, I think she was. And this was a way for me to start picturing myself perhaps being a teacher in the future. Although lately I have become a very different teacher than she was in different aspects. But I'm so appreciative of her. And another very specific reason, uh, her teachings of history were important for me, but her teachings of philosophy were even more so. So, yeah, she made a difference in my life. What about you? Who would be your first teacher to talk about?
well, I'm actually thinking of two teachers from high school, and two very different but gave me very specific things. The first teacher is Mrs. Glass, and it's interesting because these two teachers are sort of opposites. I had almost no like personal warm connection with Mrs. Glass. She was sort of known to be kind of strict and not very personable, but she taught me a simple formula for how to write that completely changed my life. And as you know, I became a writer in some ways, and both in terms of doing well in college and writing books, she really helped me at a very key stage understand how to put together my ideas, how to put together an essay that was really foundational in terms of my life, and especially my life as a writer and an author. So while I didn't have much of a personal relationship with her, I would say she really changed my life in that I just kept applying this simple formula that she taught me over and over again, and it always worked. So that was huge. And then a second teacher in high school was sort of the opposite. His name was Tim Farrell, and he was actually the faculty advisor for the school newspaper. So in a way, he wasn't really an academic teacher for me. He was an English teacher, but I never had him for English. But he really was warm and personable and funny. And I think he helped me in that he mirrored back certain things in me. And as we sometimes talk about, heart types benefit from mirroring, and mirroring is the way that a person really helps you see yourself more clearly, mirrors back something that's true about you in a very positive way. And he was just really engaging and funny, and he would both help us understand how to write an article or how to put the newspaper together in a really clear way that was very effective. But it was like he taught me that teachers can be really amazing people, and that just by having a positive relationship with them, that can help you grow and help you know yourself better. And he was just just an incredible person to know and to relate to.
Wow, I loved knowing about the two of them. And it's interesting that they are different. It sounds like they were helping fulfill two different parts of you.
Exactly. I think one was sort of the technical writing aspect, which I think, you know, Mr. Farrell also helped, but the other was really the human aspect and the encouragement as a person and as someone who I knew a little bit better, a little bit at a deeper level, and someone who was someone I really admired a lot, that also sort of mirrored back to me some of my qualities in a positive way. Let's do a short break.
Become a member now at Chestnut Paes online for a lot more Enneagram content from Bea and Uranio. Sign up for the annual plan and get access to hundreds of audio files, videos, monthly online classes, articles, and even full online Enneagram workshops. It's a great value. Visit www.cpenneagram.com. The Enneagram 2.0 podcast goes live every other Thursday on all main platforms. Stay tuned to learn more about yourself and others.
So, who would you like to talk about next? What other teachers from your life are important to mention?
Yeah, I had to rule out many from primary and secondary school. I remembered many different good teachers I had, but I want to talk now about one teacher from university. His name was Sigmar, and actually, he was my teacher both during graduate school, university, and then my master's. And he was a teacher of psychology and organizational psychology. I studied management, but I've always been more interested in themes related to humanistics, like organizational theory, organizational development, but we also had a pretty good basis in sociology, in anthropology, and other studies, including psychology. And Sigmar was one of those teachers, and he was really good. I believe he is a four, and I believe he is someone really comprehensive when it comes to different lines in psychology and an academic, and that appealed a lot to me. I think that also tells the secret that when I studied management, I kept interested in other aspects that were not the center of what is usually studied in management, right? But fortunately, it's a very wide area, and I could be in touch with those disciplines that I really loved. And Sigmar suggested me many different authors that made difference in my life later on. And his classes were very engaging, and that also connected me more to university. And I was at university since I was 17 years old and until I was 21. So I was in that phase of coming from being a teenager to becoming an adult. And it was important for me to be more disciplined and studying in ways that were different from school.
And it sounds like he really added an important piece in that even though you went on to work in business and study management, there's something so deep in you that is committed to psychological and spiritual growth. And so it sounds like there was a way that the topic that he taught about, that he opened up for you, was really core to who you are.
Yes, and there were other teachers who did that too. But he's the one I remember the most and who influenced me the most. And I always studied psychology myself, apart from
So
teachers.
the next teacher I would mention that was important in my life was my dissertation advisor in graduate school. So, as you know, I went to graduate school a few times after college. And when I was earning my PhD in communication, I needed to write a dissertation, of course. And so, when you do that, your dissertation advisor is very, very important because you really need them not only as a teacher, but also a guide. And I actually started working with a different person, a different teacher, on my dissertation, and that did not work well at all. I actually had quite a bad experience with that person. But when that went wrong, I went to the teacher I want to talk about, and that his name was Bob Entman. And I went to him, and he had been teaching me, and I had been very interested in the topics that he taught. And so I went to him and I asked if he would be my dissertation advisor, and he immediately said yes. And everything about working with him was easy and instructive. And it was a really good experience, partly because now here we were studying the impact of mass media on culture, on politics in the United States mostly. And he was so passionate about this topic. He wrote a book called Democracy Without Citizens. And this refers to the fact that in a democracy, people need information and good information in order to make wise choices in voting and in who they want to represent them. And, what we really studied was how the mass media in the United States, because they function as corporations, don't always deliver good information to the citizens. And he was so driven and so committed and so deeply interested in the things that we talked about. And what I've learned about myself over time is that I really benefit from feeling a deep sense of mission in anything that I do, that I really commit my time to. And he really modeled for me this sense of mission about learning and studying and doing research and writing that was all about having a positive impact in the world in specific ways. And so he modeled that for me. And he was also just an excellent guide. There was sort of, if it's okay if I say this, he was sort of no bullshit about him. He was just very direct. And he was really he didn't bring any extraneous stuff to the interaction between he and I. He just was very focused on what was really most important to do and think about and write about. And so I just had a very, very positive experience of being able to switch to him after getting into a difficult, challenging situation and being able to really learn from him, be guided from him. And I ended up writing a dissertation that he was very happy with and very proud of. And as a two, of course, a lot of the reason sometimes I get motivated to do work is to not so much please someone or impress someone, but because someone who's important to me, I want them to value that. I want them to see me as doing something positive. And he was a big motivator for me because I so admired the work he did. And I wanted to do the same kind of work that had the same kind of positive impact in the world. And so when I was able to write a dissertation that he found very valuable, that he thought made an important contribution, that was very meaningful for me.
Sounds fascinating, Bea. And, this acknowledgement that he did in the end with the fact that your dissertation was very good, but also celebrating that in a apparently enthusiastic way. And when you said that in the very beginning you found him passionate about the themes, I think you're talking about what teachers need to do to engage hard type students, don't you think?
I do, and I can bet that he wasn't a heart type.
Mm.
I'm not sure what type he was, but probably not a heart type. But he did an excellent job at helping me focus, but also engaging me. And I think that's the right word, engaging me. And by the way, I want to tell you that you would have really liked him because you share a common passion, which is red wine, good wine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
when
Yeah.
I finished my dissertation, I gave him a couple of really, really, really nice bottles of red wine to thank him because he really helped me in so many ways that I don't think he even really knows how much he contributed to my personal development, my intellectual development, and really my life.
Wow. Interesting. And you just made me remember of a teacher I had in a wine course, but I won't mention them.
Sounds like an important person. Yes. So who else do you want to talk about?
Okay. I think I'll start with the Enneagram. And my very first teacher, Racili, from Brazil. Racili, I always think that I was very lucky to be introduced to the Enneagram through her, because she was also a five. She is a five, like me. Um, that made things easy for me in a way. And she's a very good teacher. And also, she was this seeker that had been following a spiritual master and guru for so long, and a whole journey in spirituality, which I didn't have. I was interested on the Enneagram that someone had told me about, and I had read a book. And then I found her as a teacher. And because of her and because of the Enneagram, I opened up the doors of spirituality in my life. And Racili was very much uh, um, pivotal for that. And not to mention that she would teach meditation together with the Enneagram in different ways. And I was introduced to meditation by her, and meditations of all kinds. She was really good when it comes also to meditation theory and practice. And she introduced me to the what I consider to have been the very right meditations for me at each moment. So I'm very thankful for her. And although she had never studied with any of the American Enneagram teachers, she had read all the books, but she had this big journey on the Enneagram, on spirituality, and a little bit on the Enneagram in unusual ways, more experiential ways. And she would have some approaches to theory that were um, more advanced than what American teachers would have at the same time, and mainly about the arrows. What she taught me about the arrows from day zero was pretty much similar to what you and I teach today. And that wasn't the case at this time, 1996, with most American teachers, I'd say. So she was quite a good teacher for me.
So she was your first Enneagram teacher, is that correct?
Yes, she was.
And it sounds like she did a great job of really introducing you to the Enneagram in some key ways in terms of combining it with meditation, combining it with experience, and even sort of starting you out with a sense of the dynamism of the Enneagram symbol in terms of working with the arrow line
Exactly.
movements.
And spirituality as a whole, because People see me today and see that I'm intuitive and very much into spirituality, but they don't realize that in the past I wasn't like this. I wasn't particularly intuitive in my view, and I wasn't into spirituality up to then. I was very mental, very intellectual, and she was responsible for helping me change that.
Wow, I think that's very important to know. And right, it's like you were working in business, and so it sounds like that was a huge opening for you into realizing all that could come from spirituality.
Yeah, exactly. What about you? What is your next teacher?
So I think I will talk about my first Enneagram teachers, and of course, those were David Daniels and Helen Palmer. And maybe I'll talk about them, individually, but also together, because I did in some ways encounter them at the same time. Because as you know, David Daniels, my first Enneagram teacher, was the father of a friend of mine. So it was really my way into even knowing about the Enneagram, that it existed or what it was through my relationship with David Daniels' son, who was also named David Daniels. And David and I had been friends from junior high. So we met when we were, 12 or 13. And we were very, very close friends until he died when we were 25. And when David and I would, have dinner at his house or hang out at his house, I would sometimes interact with his father, David, Dr. Daniels, and always really appreciated him. But it wasn't until David died that I spent a lot of time with his parents and his family. And that at that same time is right when Dr. Daniels was starting his Enneagram school with Helen Palmer in Menlo Park, California. And of course, I grew up in Palo Alto, California, which is just one city to the south of Menlo Park, where the narrative school, the Helen Palmer, David Daniels Enneagram professional training program was based. So David was my way in, and David Daniels became really my first Enneagram teacher, and I would have to say, kind of a second father figure in a way, because he would. I'll often say in front of the Enneagram group that I was like a member of his family, and he certainly always treated me that way. And so he had a profound impact on me, both in terms of what I would say might be called like learning about the Enneagram informationally, but also about modeling a way of teaching or a way of being with people who were learning the Enneagram that had a profound influence on my life.
So, B, how exactly, when he became more officially your teacher in Helen and David's programs, he impacted you also, not only in that wonderful, more informal environment at his place and in life?
Well, I would say the biggest impact David had on me as a teacher was the way he blended a kind of warmth and deep, deep understanding of people with his appreciation of the Enneagram as a way of helping people wake up to their patterns and grow. Now, as you know, one of the main ways that Helen and David teach the Enneagram or taught the Enneagram is through what they would call the narrative tradition. And that is by having panels of people of different Enneagram types talk about their experience or tell their stories of being that type in groups to classes. So for instance, you have, 3 1s or 4 5s or 6 4s, all the types would get up there, and the people who are in the class would go be on the panel and describe their experience. So it's the panel method, the narrative panel method. And of course, Helen and David would moderate these panels. And the way David moderated these Enneagram panels really, really impressed me in a deep way. because, of course, he had been a psychiatrist and a therapist working with people for a long time, and that skill that he developed in inquiry, in inquiring into people's experience and knowing just the right question to ask and making an insightful comment reflecting something important that that person said. It was just masterful the way he would moderate these panels. And I remember watching him doing this and just feeling like, and I'm getting emotional talking about this, but I remember feeling like the minute I decided to become a psychotherapist was by watching him do this, and the gentle and yet really effective way he had of asking people just the right question at just the right moment that would both honor what they were saying and invite them to go deeper into understanding what was happening there or what was motivating them or the things he would say that would generate these really, really important and helpful insights about what the person was saying. It was both the warmth and the gentleness and the humor. He was very funny that he would have in working with the panelists, but also the way he would always be finding this very clever, funny, warm, genuine way of helping the person go deeper. So it was those two things. It was both supporting people, understanding people, but also the way he would bring out these important insights, both for that person and also for everyone in the class watching, that were really not only about the person, but also about the Enneagram type and also about the path of development generally. So I can remember him watching him doing this and just thinking how amazing it was. And I went back to school to become a psychotherapist because of the Enneagram, of course, but also because of the way I saw him doing what he did and how much it gave me and how much and how I saw him really helping so many people understand themselves at a deeper level, understand the types at a different level with a lot of compassion and care, and a lot of just very deep support and empathy.
And I also totally understand you, because David Daniels was a big influence to me, and so was Helen Palmer, and they are the next two names on my own list. And David Daniels made a huge impact in my life himself.
How did he make an impact on you?
When I saw him facilitating panels during his program with Helen Palmer, I was struck by how masterful he was. Also, the way that he would know the very exact moment and the questions to ask, how he would get what the problem was with the person. He would get the key thing about how Enneagram type was operating for that person. And he would do that with few words, being extremely gentle and accepting, non-judging, and also fun, loving. It's incredible. And when I was seeing him help people in very big ways and bring in so much emotionality, but holding the space and doing that masterfully, one day I had an intuition, and I said, I don't know how or why, but I'm going to do something similar to what he does. So he was this kind of influence for me. And although I didn't have this big, important personal relationship with him before, like you did, it was a huge influence. And I felt so welcomed by him and also by everybody there. Peter O'Hanrahan, Terry Cercino, Helen, and other people from the narrative community. When that was really important for me as a Brazilian who was not a native English speaker. And, people like me have much more insecurity when traveling and going to a program like that and working on our own emotions in a different language. So he was so supportive, so important. And later on, he invited me to teach that very same program in Brazil, and later on in Portugal, Spain, and Italy. And then I had one of the biggest honors of my life, which was teaching with him a few times, not many times, but with him in the classroom in Brazil, in Spain. And that is something I'll never forget.
Yes, you really helped him spread the work of their school into other countries where it wouldn't have gained access if they didn't have someone as good as you doing their programs in the native languages. So I think that's huge, and I know that he was a big mentor for you going forward. Even though you didn't have the previous relationship with him that I did, I know that you became very close, and that was a really key and important influence on you. Before we move on, I almost as a tribute to him, I want to name one other thing that I thought was really great about him as a teacher, and that is he had these key ideas that are central to not really the Enneagram types, but how to apply the Enneagram, or the importance of the Enneagram work and how it happens, that he used to say over and over again. And I think this is a really good example of how a good teacher really kind of puts in your mind some of these core ideas that really create deep roots and really important, almost an important kind of orientation to the whole work. And that is, he always used to say, energy follows attention. And he always used to say, self-remembering never becomes habitual. And there are a few more sayings like that he would say all the time. And I think that was really wise of him as a teacher, because those are the kinds of things that it really benefits Enneagram students to have in their mind as kind of a basic premise of the work.
Yes.
So I wanted to name that as well.
I actually think, Bea, that mastery exists when people come back to the simple after making things complex for a long time, and being able to convey a message that is very profound in a very short phrase or expression, or saying less, or asking a simple question at the right moment, the right way, the right theme. And that's what he had.
Now, I know that Helen Palmer was also an important teacher for both of us. So maybe we could each say a few things about what was important about our experience with Helen.
Yes, that's very important. Hmm. Do you want to start? Do you want me to start?
I think for me, Helen was someone who really got to the heart of the matter and was really strong in emphasizing some of the core principles of the Enneagram work in a really deep way. So the way she always focused so strongly on gaining more space within yourself to self-observe and to notice or be able to see the personality patterns in action, so that you could eventually, as she would say, let them drop. Now, I think sometimes it takes a little more work to get to the point where you can let them drop, but she was very committed and passionate about helping people understand what the whole point of the Enneagram is. It's not about getting all interested in the different descriptions having to do with the Enneagram. It's much more about using or deploying those insights about your Enneagram type to move beyond your type. And in her guided meditations that were so powerful, and in some ways really, I think, channeled or intuitive, she really guided you into a deep understanding of the experience of what it was like to be that type, so that you could, if that was your type, see it in action to the point where you could let it drop, or really have deep empathy for the experience of the other people and their types. What do you think was most powerful for you about Helen's teaching?
Well, first, I read Helen's book as my first Enneagram book back in Brazil, and I loved her book and went for the other ones. And she was the author that was more influential for me. Then traveling to the US as a Brazilian and meeting her at a conference and then going to her program and all that without me even knowing that David existed, only by name, because I went for Helen Palmer's training first. And that was really meaningful. And as a social five, I am all about those icons, and those big names in whatever area I get interested in. And she impressed me a lot in the first training I had with her intuition above anything else. And she told me a very direct message out of the blue, one of the first or second time I was talking to her, and she couldn't know about specifics of the career transition that I was going through, starting to work with the Enneagram back in Brazil and giving up just ending a company that I had had for 10 years. And then she came and said, boom, something that was really direct about that situation. So I didn't know what to say, and I was very impressed. And I understand that she had an impact later on, an ongoing impact on me in terms of developing my own intuition. Also, Racili had her impact through activities that she suggested and other teachers, and I also did that myself, but she was very central for that. And I also always appreciated how she could go against some Enneagram approaches when she disagreed with them. And I really appreciated that to help clarify a few things for me. I like when people are bold and clear, straightforward, like she is in those episodes.
Yes, I agree completely. One of the things I admire most about Helen is how honest she is and how direct, and how she'll just go to the heart of the matter and say what needs to be said, or say the thing that opens things up. And I think she was similar to David when she moderated panels, in that she also, I felt like, really saw things so clearly and would really ask just the right question or make a statement or help people understand what was happening in a very direct way. And I remember the way she would also appreciate things about people. Helen and David are both sixes, and so I think their teaching style was humble in a way. Like, they weren't doing it to be, they always would say they weren't doing this to be the guru, which is something I really appreciated about them. Their real priority was the quality of the Enneagram teaching, the power of the teaching, and the ability it had to help us wake up and understand ourselves, have better relationships. And they were relentless, each in their own way, of really being straightforward about here's what's happening, and pointing it out so you could face it. I remember when I was learning to moderate panels, she gave me some great feedback also, where she talked about how I tended to get a little bit caught up in what we might call the relationship, or what's going on between me and the person, and how sometimes I lost task focus. And I remember, again, with the fact that it was Helen saying something was really powerful, and she was right. And so that helped me a lot going forward to improve the way I moderated panels, to make sure I was kind of coming from my own center and staying focused on the teaching, as opposed to, maybe how well I was liked by the panelists, for instance. And so I think there was a way that she had of really cutting to the heart of the matter, in a way where she didn't really care about the fluff, that was refreshing and helpful, and really is part of, I think, the power of her teaching that so many people have gotten so much out of.
Yeah, and we have very similar experiences, Bea, with David and Helen. I'm glad to be hearing details from you, actually. And I don't know if you had also an experience that so many important parts of her teaching happened outside the classroom, in those individual conversations that she would have with you. Even if they were not long, they were meaningful.
Yes, and I love it when someone really just says what they think and expresses their opinion. And she would do that a lot, which I really, really appreciated about her. And again, even having lunch at the same table with her would be a really rich experience. So yes, I'm really glad we're talking about them in this depth, because they, I know, gave us so much, and they provided such a strong foundation for each of us, both in terms of understanding the Enneagram system itself, but also in sort of the ethics and the perspective that we bring to the doing the deep Enneagram work that we do. So, what other teachers are important for you to mention in this conversation?
I have two more teachers, and one is not a person, is a group of people from a Gurdjieffian fourth way school that I studied for several years in Brazil, in São Paulo, my home city, called Imago Mundi, the school. And I can't really name only one person. I started having classes with an absolutely brilliant man called Carlos Godo, who died a few years ago, and he knew everything there is to be known about Gurdjieff, but also about inner work in very specific ways. And he really embodied the fourth way, no doing work in the ways that Gurdjieff did. So he was a great teacher. And then there was a split in the school between two groups, and so many important new teachers that I had after that, like Chris, Luis, Rosangela, Beto, Zeca, Idel, and more. So all of them were so important for us, and all of them absolutely brilliant and very young. All of these other teachers, but absolutely brilliant in terms of how much they knew, how much prepared they were, from different backgrounds, because it was not a very orthodox Gurdjieffian school. It wasn't what is called the Gurdjieff Institute. It was another school that had a lot of influence from Gurdjieff, but also, Carlos Godo had a lineage that he learned from that came straight from Gurdjieff. So, yeah, and they practice and practice and practice, and they were a group of friends, each of them very special, but as a group, even more so. And they had this level of being that was amazing. So I studied with them for many years. They were a big influence in my life. I mean, we're still in touch, and I'm so grateful for them and all the practices that I learned. Meditations, energy practices, attention practices, presence, morphology of presence, self-remembrance, all the disciplines that Gurdjieff used to talk about, and more.
And it might be good to remind our listeners about what we're talking about here in terms of this important school in your life. And that is, Gurdjieff is one of the main figures, historical figures, that we really learned the Enneagram from, especially the Enneagram symbol and its meaning and its connection to wisdom schools and a profound view of human transformation. And his method of the work, as he called it, was the fourth way school, or the fourth way. And so it sounds like this school that was dedicated to his teachings was just profoundly impactful for you. And I think of the Gurdjieff work as really just probably, the most deepest teaching around what I think the heart of the Enneagram is all about, which is this kind of really committed and important way of seeing the work being about, the discipline of self-remembering, self-observation. As they say, your being attracts your life, like creating a level of being that we develop through intense inner work, uh, through observing ourselves and meditative practice and different ways of strengthening our ability to be more awake and aware of ourselves.
Yes, B. And, this school with all these brilliant friends was also not only based on Gurdjieff, but they had a big influence from Sufism as an esoteric line of work. And I learned so much about Sufism from them. And also, a lot about the Enneagram and the process Enneagram. They taught me so much about it. I had read many books about the process Enneagram, the Gurdjieffian Enneagram, but they taught me much more. It's things that usually they don't publish, not many people know about, a big, big influence. But then we would do Sufi dikrs, the ceremony with recitations, and I learned a lot about the Sufi names of God, the 99 names of God, and we would practice and feel into each of them, and on and on. It almost doesn't stop how much I learned from them. And then they referred me to go to a Sufi Enneagram workshop with someone else who was in Brazil, a teacher called Abdul Karim. And he is Argentinian, and he was teaching a workshop in São Paulo, my hometown. And then I went to this workshop, a weekend workshop, and it was a huge impact on me. And this is why he is the last teacher on my list, Abdul Karim. And I studied with him in his line of work for another 7 years, maybe. And he was important. Although he taught me quite a bit about the process Enneagram, the spiritual dimension of the Enneagram, and some his model of spiritual stations and the Enneagram, and a lot about Sufism in general. Although all that was very important, what was more important for me was to be initiated in a tradition that is very old, and being introduced to a spiritual master, as he calls that other teacher who's not only a teacher, who's someone really in a different state of being than we are. And through him, I connected to this very important spiritual influence in my life. I don't include him as a teacher, but I do include Abdul Karim as the one who introduced me to that line of work, through which I happened to know Sheikh Nazim later, that spiritual presence. And Abdul Karim was a teacher who did quite a bit of indirect transmission from the spiritual teacher. And I'm sure you are going to explain that maybe better than I will in English, and you're great in sometimes translating me not only into English, but also because I bring in some concepts that sometimes might be a bit complex, but I can say a bit. It's like, imagine that a very big spiritual teacher is connected to you, and it's almost like you are conveying some teachings coming from him and not from yourself. And that's what Abdul Karim did quite a bit, and that had a profound impact that is hard to explain in
Yes.
short here, perhaps another day.
Yeah, I want to just highlight what you said about the process Enneagram. So I think what you're referring to that you learned so much about from him was not the Enneagram as the typology of 9 personality types, but as a map that charts a pathway toward higher transformation, first psychological and then spiritual, and how the Enneagram itself and its component parts really highlights a very powerful symbolic representation of a specific path of development from a lower level of consciousness to a higher level of consciousness. And I know that that's a lot of what you studied with him in so many different ways that have enriched your ability to teach the Enneagram as a map of process yourself. Let's do a short break.
Did you know you can study with Bea and Uranio and work toward becoming a certified Chestnut Paes Enneagram professional? Join one of their workshops for professionals interested in integrating the Enneagram in skillful and effective ways to build your confidence applying the Enneagram as a tool to support your clients' growth and development. Learn how at www.cpenneagram.com. The Enneagram 2.0 podcast goes live every other Thursday on all main platforms. Stay tuned to learn more about yourself and others.
So these teachers, Rasili, the ones from Imago Mundi, and Abdul Karim with his Sufi order, I stayed as a student of each of them between 6 and 8 years, but always doing weekly work, daily many times, but we would meet weekly with them or through them with a group of people in what is a spiritual sangha or group. And this is why also they were so impactful, because it wasn't a workshop only. There were many, many workshops, but above all, a process of self-development that was permanent.
Well, first, I need to say that Claudio Naranjo has been very influential in my development, especially in terms of my understanding of the Enneagram. And I do want to emphasize that while I did participate in 3 of his SOT retreats, and his SOT group that stands for Seekers After Truth. It's actually an allusion to a book or a group that Gurdjieff had. And so I didn't have a very direct personal relationship with Claudio Naranjo. I need to state that was not the way my relationship was with him. It was not very personal or direct. I did attend 3 of these long retreats that are kind of the core of his teaching, these SOT retreats. And I also attended another subtype training that he did, a 3-day training in Paris. And of course, I listened to many recorded versions of workshops he did and read many of his books. But I do want to highlight this wasn't a personal connection or as personal as it was with Helen and David. But I do need to mention him because he was so impactful in my understanding of the Enneagram. I really appreciated the breadth of his knowledge. He was an important figure in the Gestalt movement, in the human potential movement. He was a colleague of Fritz Perls, who originated Gestalt therapy, which is a body-based form of therapy, which is a very important form of therapy today in the world. And he also, he was a psychiatrist, and he had a really deep understanding of meditation and spirituality and, music and art and literature and philosophy. He just knew a lot and brought a lot to his articulation of the Enneagram. Now, he would always highlight that the main thing that he taught was not the Enneagram, that it was much more a program of personal transformation, of growth. And he used a lot of things like meditation, Gestalt techniques, psychodrama, rebirthing, all kinds of different therapeutic techniques were involved in the retreats that he led. And the Enneagram was one part of that. So I learned so much from him about the things like the types, how to articulate them in terms that we could connect to different forms of psychotherapy and psychological understandings about personality development, human development, but also the ways of applying the Enneagram. And he used to say things like the Enneagram is not a standalone tool. You need to combine it with some form of therapy or some form of spiritual practice or some other kinds of very grounded self-development methods. And so I got a lot of my understanding about the Enneagram and how to apply it from him, but especially, of course, his version of the 27 subtypes that I learned in 2004 from him really changed my life, because he just, I think, had a rare ability to observe people over time through the workshops and retreats that he did, and really develop a very nuanced understanding of these 27 personality types. And that, of course, has had a huge impact on my understanding of myself, my understanding of the people that I work with, the people that we work with, and my understanding of the Enneagram system as a whole. So I do really want to mention him as a teacher who had a big impact on me, even though it was more what I would call academic or more from a teacher point of view, not so much from a personal engagement point of view, but more from a sense of theory and how to apply the Enneagram theory in the best possible way. And he was also, I think, one of his biggest strengths was as a meditation teacher. The meditations that he would lead and the different forms of meditation that he would introduce, I thought were incredibly powerful. And I loved the way he use these different kinds of techniques to help people understand themselves at a deep level and what their personal work was that they needed to do. And of course, one of the things I liked most about him was how relentless he was about confronting the ego, and that's what the work was all about. It's about confronting the ego. It's not necessarily being warm and friendly or, making people feel good about themselves or highlighting the strengths. It's about really confronting the ego so that you can release yourself from your ego and grow beyond it. And he was really strong in that, and that had a big impact on me as well. And then I think the last teacher I would just mention, although for me it's more of a spiritual influence, not a direct influence. I didn't learn from him directly, and that is Paramahansa Yogananda, who many people may know. He's the author of the book, The Autobiography of a Yogi. And for many years, I mostly worked with his lessons. He created these different lessons, and working with them as a guide to meditation, as an understanding of spirituality and how to grow spiritually. One of the things that had a huge impact on me, one is his reference to different religions and different spiritual approaches. I'm a big fan of the perennial philosophy, which is the idea that the core teaching of all religions says the same thing. And that is that the purpose of human life, really, or the purpose of spiritual growth, is to recognize the divine in us, to in some ways manifest more of our higher self, our higher potential, what might be called the divine in us, and the ways he had about communicating that. And he would talk about the teachings of Jesus Christ, and he would talk about the teaching of different spiritual teachers, but he would always bring it back to a very practical kind of spirituality, which had to do with concentration and meditation and different just key ideas that I really appreciated about him, in the way he combined them, in the way he communicated them, in a very warm and kind of loving language. His work has just been a big influence on me spiritually, so I did want to mention him as well.
Yeah, it was great to share all these influences with you. We knew most of them, but it's great to share them with our listeners, Bea.
Yes, and just to honor our teachers and teachers everywhere, and how they really help us move things forward in different ways in our own lives, and I think in terms of raising consciousness on the planet. It's time for our top 5.
What is our top 5 today, Bea?
Well, since we're talking about teachers today, our top 5 is the top 5 types that are the most natural good teachers.
Interesting. I like that. Although I think that the best teachers are the teachers of any of the 9 types when they are aware, when they are coming from a higher level of awareness. But I get that this top 5, and I'll talk in general.
And I do think that we need to say that, of course, any type can be an excellent teacher. Like you said, anyone who enjoys teaching and who is motivated and, appreciates that role can, I think, be an excellent teacher. So these are just people who maybe come more naturally to a kind of teaching style or way of being.
Yes, exactly. So what is your number 5, Bea?
So my number 5 is type 7. I think 7s have a natural way of thinking that is very interesting and enlivening for people. And I think when 7s are teachers, it's like they make it fun. They're motivated to make things interesting. They share their love of thinking about all different kinds of things that there are to think about, all different possibilities. They have creative minds. I think when they dedicate themselves to teaching, they can be really, really inspiring teachers. What about you? What's your number 5?
My number 5 is type 9. I think that especially self-preservation 9s and social 9s make up for good patient teachers that pay attention to the students, respect the students in where they come from, and they usually they are usually remembered by students as those teachers who were more patient and attentive to them and welcoming and nice, who represented some sort of safe harbor for them. I was a bit upset to not include type 6. I was in between 9 and 6 for my number 5, but I chose 9.
So my number 4 is 9. For much of the same reasons that you suggest. I think that 9s are very oriented toward connecting with people and building a bridge between what they want to communicate and what people can understand. And again, the patience that you highlight. So I agree with you on that. What's your number 4?
My number 4 is 1s. I think 1s are a little bit of the prototype of good teachers, and a bit that fun side of them being a bit rigid and at the same time good in teaching and explaining, but also doing what needs to be done and keeping not only the discipline but the pace of the teachings and people studying and being really committed. So my 4th is number 1. What is your 3rd?
My 3rd is number 2, my type. I think 2s make good teachers because they tend to be very positive, very interested in people and in the topics they teach. And again, it's similar to 9s, interested in building a bridge. They have a lot of empathy for others. And so it can be all about sharing knowledge with people in a way that benefits them and understanding how they receive things. And so being really good at saying things in a way that other people can understand. What about you? What's your number 3?
My number 3 is 7, for similar reasons to the ones that you said. And I just want to add, one of my favorite movies ever is Dead Poets Society. And the character of Robin Williams, in my view, in that movie is a social 7. And I think that character tells a lot about why I think 7s can sometimes be the most amazing and remembered teachers of all.
My number 2 is type 5, your type. one of my best friends is a teacher, and she even got a big award, like the best math and science teacher in the state. And I think she really, really loves learning herself and understanding deeply about her topic and the process of helping others understand. She teaches math, which I think isn't always easy for people to understand if they don't have a natural inclination toward math. But she does an amazing job of bringing it to life and making it interesting for people. What about you? What's your number 2?
My number 2 is you, and it's type 2. I think that for very similar reasons to the ones you said before. And I think that especially social 2s, but 2s of all subtypes in this case. And that teacher that supports the student and empathizes with the student and knows how to come across, how to convey a message when it's needed. I think this is pretty much the type 2 teacher. Now, I'm very curious about your number 1, although I think I know what it is.
I think you probably do. My number 1 is 1. And I think this is influenced a lot by having a father who's a 1 and having a good friend of mine who's a 1, who's an amazing teacher. I could listen to him talk about anything. I think there's something about the precision with which 1s communicate and the way in which they tried. I don't know if it's that they're trying to do it the right way or the best way or what it is, but I know that when I hear 1s explain things, sometimes I just think they do. It's almost like an art form of precision. So 1 is my number 1. What about you? What's your number 1?
My number 1 is 5s, and the reason is because
I thought so.
The reason is because I wanted to win. You are number 2 and I'm number 1. No, it's not that. I think it's because most of the teachers that were meaningful in my life and that I talked about at this podcast were 5s. So probably my personal experience with 5s is very meaningful. I just think that teaching for 5s is a natural fit. It's a lot about understanding, learning, conveying information. And I just want to point out that it's a total myth, in my view, that 5s only hoard information. I think that that's not very accurate, although it might happen in a few instinctual sequences, but usually it's not the case. 5s really want other people to get what they are getting. And they can be very patient and explain things in details and in ways that are good, although they can also, as you well know, they can also get very complex sometimes in what they say. But even though they can be a little charming when doing it. So I think 5s are pretty good teachers.
Yeah, I agree. So thanks for listening. Join us again for our next Enneagram 2.0 podcast, where we talk about all things Enneagram.